whatever.
Okay, is everybody ready?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, here's some more people coming in.
Make sure to pin him.
Okay, everybody in?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, well, thanks for hopping on with me for a minute. I bring you greetings from upstate New York in the Adirondacks, about 30 minutes from the path in the path of totality when the eclipse is about to hit. But I was able to watch the governor's live stream from here. I up through Jason Powell's briefing. I didn't get to hear anything after that or anything in the Gaggle. So whatever I say is premised on what I read there. We have not yet seen the detail of the governor's 233 budget amendments yet. Our staff hasn't had a chance to analyze them, and his presentation has left us with a lot of questions. But just a few remarks I wanted to make about it. First of all, while the governor had a very conciliatory tone today, this press conference he had today is pretty unprecedented. In the 14 years that I've served, or 15 years I've served, I've never seen a governor do a press conference regarding their budget amendments. And I think this press event is really a distraction from the record number of vetoes this governor has issued, which is unprecedented in the history of our Commonwealth. In terms of his presentation, I found it striking that the governor says he now opposes tax increases after he proposed one himself in his own budget. In the press conference, the governor's staff took credit for a lot of proposals that were made in the budget by the Democrats in the House and the Senate and the General Assembly, which were not in his original budget. I also want to note that the tone of the Secretary of Finance at the outset regarding the state's fiscal outlook was markedly different than the tone he gave at the first meeting of the Senate Finance Committee at the beginning of session. And I would encourage all of you to go back and look at the link I tweeted back to Secretary Cummings' presentation in January, where he said there were a lot of economic red flags in the horizon and a lot of recessionary pre-indicators in the Virginia economy that ought to give us significant caution in terms of how we budget. The presentation today was very rosy and rainbows and sunshine, and as if we have lots of money to spend on everything we want. And that's inconsistent with the tone the administration was taking in December and January, which is not, and that kind of inconsistency is very troubling. I also just want to note that from our perspective, the governor continues to engage in these sort of campaign style events and branding of his initiatives, which is not something we normally see out of Virginia governors. In a lot of ways, it feels like this governor has not yet left campaign mode and moved into governing mode. And he's continued to be sort of take a very partisan tone with regard to a lot of his policy proposals. I noted that the governor said that he continues to oppose us staying in Reggie. I would note that the Reggie situation is currently still in litigation because the General Assembly and many other people believe the governor's action withdrawing us from Reggie was illegal. Virginia law required us to join Reggie, and he pulled us out by executive action, which was not authorized. And that's going to continue to be a bone of contention. The big questions with regard to the budget you just heard is we have serious questions as to whether or not this budget can be structurally balanced. The governor's prior budget, which he claimed was balanced, rated our rainy day fund. It rated our state literary fund. It rated our revenue reserve fund. It used one-time money from construction to fund ongoing expenses. It used a bunch of tricks to so-called balance our budget, which is required by our Constitution. In the presentation you just heard, you didn't hear any explanation as to how the governor is dealing with the $2.4 billion carry forward from the last budget or the $800 million in our revenue reserve fund. And from my perspective, maybe at Carlisle, it's okay to say a budget is structurally balanced when you use one-time money. But unlike Carlisle or private equity firms, the General Assembly has to follow our Constitution, which requires a balanced budget. And we have to work with our bond rating agencies to ensure the long-term solvency of our Commonwealth and ensure our long-term AAA bond rating, which we've held now for almost 100 years. And as is often the case, it's Virginians and it's the General Assembly who are the ones who often have to do the serious work and continue to live with the consequences of what's often short-term fiscal recklessness that's proposed by governors that they propose in order to make the news. And so we're going to be looking at these proposals very carefully to make sure that they're that the budget is structurally balanced in accordance with our Constitution, in accordance with our bonding agency obligations. And we're going to make sure that this budget, these amendments provide the level of services that Virginians expect, given the level of wealth and income and expectations of our citizens. So that's just a few reactions I had. And again, we have a lot of work to do to evaluate these 233 amendments. I don't remember any governor ever proposing 233 amendments. And it's obviously going to take some time to get through all that. Anyways, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I got to get outside with my family to see the eclipse here pretty soon, so I can take a couple.
Senator, you said something about the governor taking credit for some things that the that the General Assembly's budget contained. What were those things? Can you give an example or two?
A 3% teacher pay increase, a 3% state employee pay increase. I mean, his budget didn't have the same pay increase for teachers as state employees, and it also didn't have 3%. That's just one example, but a lot of the natural resource commitments weren't in there. I don't believe his original budget funded the IDDD waivers in the same way. There was a whole series of things. I wasn't taking notes, but his original budget did not have all those things in it. And I think
Okay.
RTD had a question there.
It's Sarah from AP. I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think your caucus will be open generally to his proposal that a compromise position on taxes is just to do nothing? Stick with the status quo, leave the digital sales tax alone?
Well, we first of all, our obligation is to balance the budget in accordance with the Constitution, in accordance with what our rating agencies expect to maintain our bond rating. And if we're going to maintain the level of spending that we had in our prior budget and maintain the budget priorities we had, the modest tax modernization that we had in our last proposal was necessary in order to get the revenues to support that level of service. And so I also question, I haven't seen the governor's amendments, but I think there could be serious constitutional questions with exactly how he proposed his amendments, because, under our Constitution, you can't propose amendments where you decouple revenue and spending, because then you end up having a constitutionally unbalanced budget, which would be illegal. And I also haven't seen whether he's proposing to line item veto anything in the budget. He wasn't really clear about that in terms of how he framed his proposal. He's talked about 233 amendments, but he hasn't said anything about line item vetoes. And that's been a bone of contention in the past between the legislature and other governors I know. And so it's really hard to say, Sarah, without seeing his exact proposal, exactly how he's proposing to accomplish this. But if we want to maintain the level of services that we've proposed, I don't see how you get that done without the revenue adjustments and the tax modernization proposals that we had in our proposal.
Senator, what do you think are the intentions of the governor with this newfound tone that he's taking?
Well, he's clearly trying to make up for the fact that he's vetoed more bills than any other governor in the history of the Commonwealth, and make it appear that he's not being nearly as confrontational or partisan as he's been for the last 3 weeks. But I also suspect that tonight you're probably going to see another 20 to 50 vetoes come out of his office, but he didn't bother to talk about that today either. So we'll see how people are feeling after, a governor's issued probably over 200 vetoes by the time this is said and done. But that 200 vetoes doesn't really set the tone for, hey, let's hold hands and get along and sing Kumbaya.
Senator, to follow up on Sarah's question, what do you make of the governor's framing of the tax duality here? He calls it a way to find common ground to have no tax cuts and no tax increases. That he says this is a way to find common ground. What's your response to that?
Well, I think we could find common ground by adopting the tax proposals that we had in our budget. And I don't believe that there's a way for the governor to amend a budget after that's been proposed that's particularly constitutional. And so I don't feel like I know he likes to say lots of things, but that doesn't always necessarily mean they're true. And I can appreciate the fact that he wants to try to show he's trying to work with us for the press. But the reality is, I don't know how somebody who drops 200 vetoes in an unprecedented manner and has a press conference no governor's ever had before could be seen as trying to be conciliatory. He's trying to cover up for the fact that he's been incredibly confrontational and aggressive with vetoing very modest policy proposals, many of which are supported by over 70% of voters in polling. You know, we had some very important policy priorities that we tried to accomplish this session, including the retail sale of marijuana, raising our minimum wage to $15 an hour. And you know, he won't even have dialogue about it.
Senator, just one last question here on the about a week and a half to go before, as he pointed out, to get everything accomplished, or at least to come to some sort of agreement on this. Do you see that happening in a week and a half with 233 amendments, or are we headed into uncharted territory?
I think we have enough time to vet them, but we'll see how veto session goes. The Constitution says that we can take up to 10 days in veto session to consider these things. So we'll see if we end up going just one day like usual, or whether we take a few days to look at it. I haven't talked to the House leadership or my own caucus yet about how long it's going to take to get through all this, but we are going to have a pretty significant amount of work compared to what we usually have to do in a veto session. So I wouldn't be surprised if we end up having to take more than one day.
Oh, go for it.
Hey, Graham from the Mercury. So one thing the governor just said in his gaggle is that he thinks you all really aren't that far apart. You're talking about a couple $100 million and a $64 billion budget. What's your response to him saying that you really aren't that far apart philosophically on what's?
Yeah, Graham,
what
that's hard to say. I can understand why he would maybe pitch it that way, but I don't see how that's possible given the tax cuts or the revenue changes that he proposed. And again, the big question we have is exactly how did he make this balance, you know, without having the revenue changes we proposed. You know, he did not explain in his presentation what he's doing with the $2.4 billion revenue carry forward from last year's budget or the $800 million revenue reserve fund. And in his last budget, he claimed it was structurally balanced when he was using one-time money to pay for all kinds of things. And he didn't have any plans on how to pay for anything in year two. I mean, you don't structurally balance a 2-year budget by using one-time money in year one and then figuring it out later. Maybe that's how you do it in business, but that's not how we do it in Virginia. And so we need to carefully look at all this to see whether this budget is consistent with Virginia's traditions and our fiscal conservatism that has allowed us to keep that bond rating for almost 100 years.
All right, Senator, I think we're all set here. So thank you so much. Enjoy the eclipse.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Anybody else got anything?
No, I think we're good. I will just say one thing. I don't know if I want to respond to your comment. The governor claimed in the gaggle afterwards that there are no line item vetoes in the budget. It's purely the 233 amendments.
None yet. After veto session, that could always change.
I was going to say it's not 11:59 yet.
Yeah. Well, there's also after veto session, he still has the opportunity to veto the budget after that. So we'll see.
I asked him about that, and he was non-committal.
Watch, that maybe answers your question.
There we go. Thank you very much, sir.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for getting on.
All right.